Thank you so much, ma'am. So, good evening, everyone. I am Koil Banerjee, and I am absolutely delighted to welcome you to the Cultural Studies Research Forum today. I hope I am audible.
Yes.
Okay. We are thrilled this evening to place our 9th public lecture of 2025 featuring the esteemed speaker, Dr. Ritu Shri Sengupta. Today, she will be leading us through the compelling and crucial subject, the Empire Writes Back, Literary Resistance and Post-Colonial Identity. But first, for those joining us for the first time, let me share a brief introduction to our organization, the CSRF. Cultural Studies Research Forum is a student-led non-profit established in 2022, built upon the conviction that knowledge holds transformative power. We fulfill this mission by organizing free public lectures and discussion that span a diverse cultural spectrum from literature and art to music and food. Our ultimate goal is to empower students, exposing them to novel ideas, nurturing critical thinking, and cultivating a deeper appreciation for the complex and multifaceted world around us. Today, we are honored to host a scholar whose academic trajectory reflects international engagement and deep literary expertise, Dr. Ritushri Sengupta. Dr. Sengupta is currently an assistant professor of English at Pattoshire Mahavidyalaya, where she also serves diligently as the IQAC coordinator. Her academic foundation is exceptionally strong. She secured the first rank in her master's degree from the prestigious Vishwabharati University in 2014. Her commitment to global scholarship is evident through her distinguished record. She was a 2022-2023 Fulbright alum, undertaking research at Indiana University and previously served as an exchange program student at Yunnan University, China. Her research accolades also include a funded research residency in London in 2018, awarded by New Earth UK. A prolific researcher, Dr. Sengupta has published widely in esteemed national and international journals, contributing to several international anthologies. Her diverse research interests, including children literature, eco-criticism, Bengali literature, and of course, post-colonial literature, provide a rich foundation for today's discussion. She has also recently completed her postdoctoral work from BITS Tilani, Rajasthan. Dr. Sengupta's perspective on literary resistance and identity is truly unique, drawing from both global and local context. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Ritu Sengupta. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Koel. I have never known that so much could be said about me. But again, thank you very much. I am very grateful to the organization that has invited me to deliver this lecture today evening. The title of my lecture today is The Empire Writes Back, Literary Resistance and Post-Colonial Identity. So I want to wish everybody a very, very good evening. And I want to delve into this journey towards exploring fascinating and foundational concept in post-colonial studies. Primarily, what is to be marked here is that the name, the Empire Writes Back, this phrase comes from a very influential book by Bill Ashcroft, Gareth Griffiths, and Helen Tiffin. It was published in the year of 1989. So the time itself shows that many of the colonies by then had been decolonized, at least politically. That is why it was important to remind us of the year. However, the word or the phrase "the empire writes back" has come to symbolize a much larger movement, a global movement of voices from Africa to Asia to Caribbean, all reclaiming the right to tell their own stories. Of course, it is a witty play on the Star Wars film, The Empire Strikes Back. So the strikes back being replaced by writes back, as you all can understand. Yet, in literary and political terms, it signifies something far deeper. It refers to a moment of linguistic and cultural retaliation by those who had been historically silenced. When we say the empire writes back, we mean that the formerly colonized are now using the tools of the colonizer, particularly language and literature, to challenge, subvert, and reimagine the world. In the context of India, however, we must understand that the aggression or the colonial aggression or the process of colonization did not happen through language initially. It came through religion. Srirampur missionary and certain other missionaries had come to preach. Now, of course, many of you would say that there were the French too, of course. Now, just because the French had helped our Shirajuddaula to somehow fight the English, it does not justify that they had greater plans for Bengal or Pan India. They were also attempting at colonization or aggressive imperialism. They lost the war and tried to become saints, but they were not saints. Had they been saints, why at the first place did they bother to come from France to Chandanagar? This question and many questions like this needs to be asked this evening. During the colonial era, European empires, British, French, Portuguese, and Spanish, imposed not only political control but also cultural domination. Literature, education, and language were all used to reinforce the idea of European superiority. In a letter, a missionary had written to a fellow countryman was that these people do not understand religion as we do. Now, that is a rather bold statement. So, if understanding religion means understanding Christianity, that is a separate cause. But when a person makes a statement that these people do not understand religion, therefore they're stupid, that statement is coming from some sort of a colonial superiority. That is not welcome. But that had exactly what had happened. So, from this superiority came into being the politics of oppression, or rather, the politics of colonial oppression. Colonial writing portrayed the colonized as the other who's always running short of something, who's not white, who's not anglicized, who's not Christian. So, when a person's identity is being defined in terms of inferiority or constructed inferiority, then there is definitely something wrong. The colonial politics had been shaped in a way where strategically the race that's been colonized could be more aggressively subjugated. So the other was always the backward, irrational, emotional, and definitely in need of Western civilization. Postcolonial writing therefore becomes the reversal of that process. It is the act of reclaiming the right to narrate one's own story. And that is why it is important to look at texts that has been written by white European writers. I wanted to say male writers, but some of the writers were female too. So, and then look at them from the lens of postcolonialism to find out the gaps, to find out the instruments, literary instruments, of course, which has been used to subjugate the other. if you want to understand Bengali culture or Gujarati culture, somebody from the concerned states or the concerned country would do more justice than somebody coming from Birmingham. That is common sense. That does not require any critical theory or any theoretical extra knowledge. That is basic common sense. Postcolonialism acted as the impetus to appreciate, to adapt, and to acknowledge the need to re-establish the common sense into a critical theory, into an umbrella term that would incorporate several other proponents of postcolonial theory. Therefore, when we say the empire rides back, we mean that the people who were once colonized are now responding intellectually, politically, and creatively to the stories the colonizers told about them. Over the next half an hour, we'll unpack this idea through several parts. What this really means, what this phrase really means, and where it comes from, how colonialism controlled culture and narrative, the ways post-colonial literature resists that control, the importance of language and identity, and why all this still matters today. So the historical context, as we all know, was extremely derogatory. When Macaulay had visited India, he made a statement, a very popular statement that has later been termed as Macaulay's Minute or Macaulay's Minute, where he said that all the literature and all the books that the Orient or India had was equivalent to one stack of English books. Very interestingly, as far as my knowledge affirms, he did not know any Indian language. Forget about Bengali. He did not know Sanskrit. He did not know Hindi. He did not know Persian. He did not know Arabic. But still, a bold statement as such was made by him. So, when Edward Said in Orientalism said that colonialism wasn't only about economics or politics, it was also about knowledge and representation. Europe created an image of the Orient, mysterious, exotic, and inferior. And that image justified imperial rule. I'll take a moment to explain this. If something is mysterious, Europe will always have more and more people, by people I mean men, to go and explore the country because that country is underexplored or unexplored at all. Exotic, because anything that is exotic appeals more. When we go to a fruit seller, we always look at the dragon fruit. Some of us even buy it, completely knowing that it tastes pretty odd, but still we buy it because it's exotic. So people have a thing for exotic things. So if we are representing a country as exotic, people would go there. People would try to venture there. And lastly, inferior. When we look at something that is inferior, or at least we try to imagine something as inferior, it is for our own benefit, because then we are no longer scared of them. If I may be bold enough to say, when we look at something and we imagine that to be inferior, it somehow allows us to look down upon this or upon it. And therefore, it is easy to control, it is easy to conquer, it is even legit to destroy. In literature, this ideology was everywhere. We can think of Rudyard Kipling's poem, The White Man's Burden, which describes colonization as a moral duty, quote unquote, to serve your captives' needs. So they're not only doing things that are politically incorrect, they're also justifying it. That is the tragic part of colonial literature. Or we can see Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, where Africa becomes a symbol of chaos and savagery. Through such texts, the colonizer became the storyteller, and the colonized were reduced to characters, usually the silent ones, without any agency. Now imagine growing up in a world like that, educated in the colonizers' schools, reading only their books, absorbing their worldview. That's why post-colonial literature became so important. It was a way to rewrite that reality. Very interestingly, I would like to draw your reference to Bengal Renaissance, the classic renaissance that Bengal celebrates even today. It was quite all right that the Brahmo culture was flying high, and students from Bengali elite communities were going to presidency and studying under the tutelage of Henry de Rosio. But it was quite okay to study P.B. Shelley or Byron. I still did not understand that what was the need to adopt the culture that the British were already soaked in. I have nothing against certain food preferences or beverage preferences, but I do not think that consuming alcohol was a part of education. But nevertheless, the cultural aggression went to such a level that consuming alcohol had become a part of becoming the neoliberal intellectual in Bengal Renaissance. And I'm not even going into the detail of the food preferences. So I wouldn't say that it was absolutely wrong. But the question arises, wasn't it also breaching cultural boundaries? Just because a group of students were being educated through Western ideas, that probably was not a license to become pro-British. They were definitely not pro-British per se, but again, culturally becoming pro-British was also probably a manifestation of colonial aggression. And they were probably unknowingly a victim to that. And secondly, this colonial politics of erasing literature or erasing local or regional flavors from the purview of literature is very, very relevant today, because if you look at America, uh, for the last few years, America has been very minutely erasing slave history because they think that it is very traumatic for the children to learn about the slavery. So, however, they do not mind practicing casual racism even today. They have a problem if the children are aware of the slave history. So that is where the neo-colonization is taking place, because erasing somebody's painful history in the name of liberal development or liberal progress is extremely unacceptable. As far as my knowledge concerns, this is absolutely unacceptable. So how do writers, quote unquote, write back? Postcolonial literature resists empire in several powerful ways. Let's look at four of them. Number one, language or linguistic resistance. Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the Kenyan novelist and of course the great writer of Decolonizing the Mind, he said that he would stop writing in English altogether. So he began to write in Gikuyu, his mother tongue. For Ngugi, to speak the colonizer's language was to accept a colonized identity. Others took a different path. Chinua Achebe and Salman Rushdie did not reject English, they remade it. Achebe once beautifully said, I quote, "The English language will be able to carry the weight of my African experience." Now, what does that mean? It means that not many people all over the world are, well versed in Gikuyu or other African languages. However, as English is a well known and well versed language, if the experience of the African colonized people or formerly colonized people come out, then it will be much more widespread. That is, like, both the options are available, and both of them, like Ngugi as well as Achebe, are correct on their own terms. On the other hand, our very own Bankim Chandra was writing Rajmohan's Wife in 1882, which was in English. At the same time, he was writing Devi Chaudhurani in Bangla or Krishnakantar Wheel in Bangla, and we are still reading all of that. And it needs to be remembered that he was serving the Raj. He was working for the British government at a very high administrative post. So all these positions are one of privilege, and they best exercised it to do justice to the manifestation of their own experience. So writers twisted English, infused it with local rhythms and idioms, and made it their own. This hybrid English became a weapon, a way to decolonize the language from within. Salman Rushdie's very famous word is chutneyfication. He could have said mixing, he could have said amalgamation, but he decided to write chutneyfication of history. So, unless you know what is chutney, you will never understand. And Salman Rushdie had this still he has got this power in his writing that forces a person to look into the culture in which the novel is steeped, and then it is on the reader. You want to find out what is the meaning of chutneyfication? Please go and find out what is chutney. You are the reader. It's not my responsibility as an author to spoon feed you everything. Now, that is the guts a post colonial writer can afford today. And that is what we must learn to appreciate. The next resistance that I want to talk about is narrative resistance. The writers resist through storytelling itself. They take well known Western narratives and tell them from new perspectives. A brilliant example is Jean Rice's White Sargasso Sea, which retells Jane Eyre from the point of view of Bertha Mason, the Creole woman locked in the attic. Rice gives voice to the silenced madwoman and asks, who defines madness after all? Just because the white husband is claiming the wife to be mad, that doesn't mean that she's mad at all. There could be an alternative history altogether. Another example is Amy Caesar's A Tempest, which rewrites Shakespeare's The Tempest. In his version, Caliban, the enslaved islander, does not just obey Prospero, he rebels, demanding freedom. Because Prospero was in his island. He was not in Prospero's territory. If Prospero had a problem with his brother, then that's Prospero's problem. He did not have any right to come into Caliban's island and make a mess out of it. That is something Amy Caesar was protesting through literature. These rewritings are not mere imitations, they are acts of liberation. They expose how the original texts carried colonial assumptions, and they replace those with voices that had been erased. Third, we have cultural resistance, the revival of indigenous myths, traditions, and forms. Writers like Derek Walcott from the Caribbean and Ole Soyinka from Nigeria combined Western literary techniques with local mythologies. They remind readers that before colonization, there were civilizations rich with knowledge, spirituality, and art. In Walcott's poetry, the Caribbean Sea itself becomes a metaphor for cultural mixing, painful, yes, but also creative. In Walcott's poetry, the Caribbean Sea itself becomes a metaphor for cultural mixing, painful, but definitely in a different way. It was powerful. Powerful with what? Powerful with experiences. In Shoika's plays, Yoruba mythology coexists with modern politics, proving that African culture is alive, not a relic. If we are into Indian literature here, we should definitely look at Tughlaq by Karnat. And we can see how Indian politics could be reinterpreted. Finally, many post-colonial writers expose not just the past, but also the present. And therefore, the final resistance that we want to talk here is political resistance, the ongoing forms of domination after independence. For instance, Achebe's A Man of the People shows how corruption replaced colonialism in Nigeria. Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things explores how caste, gender, and class oppression still structure Indian society. And Ngugi's Petals of the Blood attacks the betrayal of revolutionary ideals in post-colonial Kenya. So, quote unquote, writing back isn't only about the empire of the past. It's also about confronting the new empires of power, capitalism, and inequality that persist today. In this context, I want to take your attention for a moment and ask, don't we also see colonization today? We have an entire generation of people who are eating food that are processed in the most American or European recipes. people are living on coke. And previously, it was a country that was colonizing other countries. Right now, the countries are colonizing other countries through food and other consumable substance. The neo-colonization, I have a term for it, is Coca-Colization. So the first thing that tried to take over as a cultural aggression today. Today, it's no longer just about plain and simple capitalism. Today, it's way more layered. So countries are controlling each other through food, through fashion, through tourism. So this open market chains and everything. So in a way, we are all victims of neo-colonization today. And when post-colonial writers use English, the colonizers' language, are they liberating themselves or compromising their authenticity? This is the question that we all have today. But again, there isn't just one answer. But this tension between rejection and adaptation lies at the heart of post-colonial identity. Many a times we often see a child today speaking in multiple languages. And some of us criticize that child, some of us praise that child. The problem is that neither criticism is going to help, nor the praise. It's just a cultural situation right now that we have all become polyglots. We are constantly switching between English, Bengali, Hindi, and God knows what. This is also a gift of colonial hegemony that we are probably trying to fight in some way. The next part of my lecture I have termed as language, hybridity, and identity, where I want to bring your attention to the fact that language and identity are deeply intertwined. Colonial education taught people to see English or French as superior, a native language as inferior. Over time, this created what Ngogi called, quote unquote, the colonization of the mind. Even today, when we go to a fancy restaurant, everybody's talking in English. The restaurant is based in, probably, as I'm from Bengal, I would say the restaurant is in Kolkata. And why are people talking in English? I mean, I'm not in New York. Or if the restaurant is in Delhi, why are people talking in English? They can talk in Haryanvi for all I care, but they are not, because English still is considered superior. This is the colonial hangover we are still having, and this is reality. But post-colonial writers turned this around, at least tried to. They showed that language could be transformed, not just resisted. Here, the theorist Homi K. Bhabha gives us an important idea: hybridity. Hybridity means the blending of cultures to create something new, a third space, as Bhabha calls it. It's not pure, it's not fixed, but it's alive. If somebody wants to speak in English, let that person do it. If somebody wants to speak in a regional language, let that person do it. If somebody wants both, that is also okay. But one must be inclusive. The hierarchy must be negated. There is nothing superior and inferior as far as language is concerned. There's a beautiful poem I remember sometimes by Kamala Das, an introduction. She writes, "The language I speak becomes mine, all mine, mine alone." This confidence should be there in every post colonial individual's mind, that there is nothing to be ashamed of. If we look at Salman Rushdie's Midnight Children, he writes in English, but it's full of Indian idioms, wordplay, and rhythm, a language that reflects India's diversity. Rushdie, somewhere he had written, I quote, "We must embrace the brokenness of our language because it tells our story." As a nation state, India had been broken. India had been colonized, brutally oppressed in multiple ways. So the scars are not going to fade away, and they shouldn't fade away, because the day we lose our scars, we lose our identity. We are a nation that has fought against 200 years of colonialism. So we must be very proud of that. So hybridity isn't a weakness, it is a creative force. It is how post-colonial identities survive, adapt, and grow. Let's now turn to another kind of resistance, the recovery of history. Colonial narratives often erased indigenous perspectives. Post-colonial writers act like historians, piecing together what was lost. Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart rewrites African history from within, showing the richness of Igbo culture before the British arrived. Toni Morrison's Beloved transforms the history of slavery into a deeply personal story of trauma and remembrance. Bapsi Sidhwa's Ice Candy Man and Salman Rushdie's Midnight Children retell the history of Indian partition, not from the perspective of politicians, but from the ordinary people who faced the real trauma. Through memory, these writers resist forgetting. They remind us that remembering is a political act. Very interestingly, as I was going through these notes that I had formerly made, I realized there's one writer we all really don't talk about, that is Sharman Alexie. Sharman Alexie is a Native American. Popularly, we call them as Red Indians. America does not acknowledge the Native Americans from whom they had very cruelly taken the America that they are manifesting to the world today. Sharman Alexie talks about those people, their simple lives that has been destroyed by the capitalist aggression that had started just after the British convicts were sent to America to quote unquote explore. Every time some white uh, country has sent a group of white men to some country to explore, the disaster called colonialism has happened. That is the truest part of history that I have probably pronounced this evening. The key theorists of postcolonialism that we all must remember, and of course, there are several others who are constantly working in this field. One would be Edward Said. His book Orientalism reveals how the West was invented as an image. And sorry, how the West invented as an image the East. Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak, in her essay, Can the Subaltern Speak?, warns us that even when we try to give the oppressed a voice, we might still be speaking for them. We are not empowering them. We are merely giving them, like we are imagining that we are helping them. We are not empowering them. That is not empowerment. To speak of somebody is not empowering them. To empower somebody is to make sure they speak on behalf of themselves, not us. Homi K. Bhava, who introduces hybridity and mimicry, showing how colonial subjects mimic the colonizer, but never perfectly, and that imperfection can undermine colonial authority. And of course, Franz Fanon, who says that how the intellectual colonized individual is the sharpest and strongest threat to colonial regime. And by regime, I mean the propagandist and narcissist and oppressive system that was being run by the imperial governments very systematically. Together, they give us the intellectual map for understanding how quote unquote writing back works on multiple levels: cultural, political, and psychological. The contemporary relevance of it needs to be understood today. Now, more than 70 years after decolonization, one might ask, is the empire still there? Yes, though it looks different. Today's empires, as I spoke before, today's empires are economic, digital, and linguistic. English dominates global communication. Western media still shapes much of the world's imagination. Fashion industry is definitely coming from the Western world. That's why writers like Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, Mohsin Hamid, and Jhumpa Lahiri continue the project of writing back. They explore migration, race, diaspora, and belonging, showing how identity remains fluid in a globalized world. So the act of resistance continues. The empire still speaks, but now so does everyone else in multiple voices. And of course, the acceptance and acceptability both has increased. So now to conclude, I want to say that the Empire Writes Back is not just about literature. It's about reclaiming humanity. It's about turning the master's language into the people's voice. It's about writing our way into existence on our own terms. As the Nigerian writer Ben Okri once said, Ben Okri is probably one of those people who could speak the most painful things about colonialism in the most poetic ways. He writes, stories can conquer fear, they can make the heart bigger. And that's exactly what post-colonial literature does. It enlarges the human heart by restoring the voices that the empire had once tried to silence. It's important to hear what was so long unheard. So I humbly conclude my modest effort at defining post-colonialism. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was really a magnificent and profoundly insightful lecture, I can tell. And also, you gave us a truly illuminating look at how literature actively works to reclaim narratives and redefine identity. It's clear that this subject is central to understanding our world today. Thank you so much for breaking down such complex ideas with such clarity and elegance. Now, I know that many of you are eager to follow up on some of these points. So, we will now open the floor for a brief question answer session. Anyone? Yes, yes. You can unmute yourself and just talk to me.
Go and
Just
speak.
a second.
Go and
Hi,
talk. Go and
am I audible?
Absolutely audible, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Sen Gupta, for a nice and informative lecture on resistance. My question was that the writers that we quote for resistance, in fact, the very discipline of resistance writing, as you would well know, comes from it comes from University of Buffalo, mainly from Ubada Halu, who again is from West, or the authors that we quote, say Rushdie, say Twango, say you quoted others. These are all people who are actually situated in the West, who are actually, say Rushdie, for example. So when we talk about resistance, my question was two-pronged. One, how do we, explore this paradox that, well, we are talking about post-colonialism, for example, Jhumpa Lahiri. I mean, she's not based in India, and I doubt her novels would have had as much acceptance as she were, say, living in, for example, in Kashmir, where I come from. Similarly, in Kashmir, we have, for example, Aga Shahid Ali, who is much venerated here, but mainly situated because I wonder if he were writing from Kashmir, he would have achieved as much global importance. So, how do we resolve this paradox that, well, we are talking about post colonization or decolonization? Again, we are relying on figures whose location is very much in the very same paradigm, power structures, privileges that we are trying to think about. One, that. Second, what about inevitable resistance? Sometimes resistance, for example, in Aga Shahid Ali, or in terms of Faiz Ahmad Faiz, who
I
is
love,
universally
I love it.
acknowledged to be so much resistance. So, what about their class position? For example, nobody seems to talk about Faiz Ahmad Faiz's class position, though he wrote much for a classless society, but he himself was from a very landed class.
Yes.
The very fact that he is able to employ ghazal vocabulary is because he was steeped in the classical tradition which came via an access to education which was not available to everyone of his era. A lot of poetry from his era, which was leftist, did not achieve the same amount of acclaim. So, what about that resistance, that problematizing resistance? How do we deal with those paragons of resistance? How do we problematize it? And what about this contaminated resistance then? How do we think of that? How do we resolve these paradoxes?
I am so glad somebody has openly said this out loud. When I was a MA student, I always thought, why is that all the post-colonial writers and theorists are coming from the West? That used to be something that has troubled me for long. And you are very right when you're saying that, be it Edward Said or be it Homi Bhabha or Gayatri Spivak Chakraborty, all are from the West. Now, the thing is, the pain of the history from which they are originally coming, especially uh, the indigenous history, precisely, that would have not reached the global audience had they not been from the West. Now, the paradox is that uh, the first world or the first world academia still maintains a superiority. And these people are actually the product of the neo-colonization that I was just referring to. And the worst part is that there are brilliant authors. Faiz is not the only author in Urdu. There is Mir Taki Mir and there is Manzoor from Kashmir. I am a fan. And there is Fatima Bhutto, who is from writing from Pakistan. And there are several other writers who are brilliant. But again, in order to become global, the publisher is again coming from the Western world. That is another tragedy. And as we were just talking before the lecture, there are beautiful Malayalam writers and Marathi writers and Oriya writers, even Bengal writers. Now, they are not translated, they are not published. And still, there is this superiority and inferiority binary going on, which is trying to thwart voices coming from the East even today. Just the jargons that the Western world uses to justify the academic culture right now is disgusting. So, what you said is so real. And you should read a book by Jhumpa Lahiri. And then you should, I'll just give you the name of the book. Just give me a moment. Uh, the name of the book is Lowland. It's on the Bengal Naxalite period. My personal experience was I had read the book and I had gifted it to one of my senior colleagues. She was so angry because she had lost people in the Naxalite movement, and what this author had written had got nothing to do with the real Naxalite history. But right now, this text is being served in pan world or pan world academia as a classic text on Naxalite history. So not only that wrong history is being served, it is being celebrated. So you are absolutely right in what you just said. But again, we all have to start somewhere, na? Had Orientalism as an idea not being not being said out
May
by
I
Edward Said.
interrupt here?
Yeah, please,
May I
please.
interrupt?
Yeah,
I
please,
think
please.
something that I came to understand since I have been trying to engage with the concept of resistance. My whole PhD was on resistance itself, resistance poetry itself. I think one of the truest forms of resistance that we fail to acknowledge is this whole idea of contamination. We somehow hold resistance to be very Puritan positions, very
Yeah, but
absolute positions.
no, that is a very wrong thing. Resistance can never be pure because the people who are
Yes,
resisting
I
is
think as
already
long as we
corrupt.
agree that there will be imperfections and there will be
Yes,
contaminations, there will be
yes,
contradictions within those very paragons that we
of
hold dear,
course.
that I think is the truest resistance because it
Yes.
refuses to hold, the center refuses to hold, so as
Things
to
fall
say.
apart. Yes, things
Yes,
fall
so that
apart.
is the truest resistance.
Of course. And we must, the act of resistance is important. And nothing is pure anymore. As if we go back to Jean-Paul Sartre, Jean-Paul Sartre in Huis Clos, or in Huis Clos, the drama, he says there's nothing called perfect. Imperfection must be accepted and lived with. So there is nothing pure or nothing jingoistic about resistance. we are already corrupt. The moment colonization hit us, we had been corrupt. I'm not even saying that we lived in a very pure era before colonization. In undivided India, regional politics was even, quite at par with the British brutality, right? So humankind, as Hobbes had rightfully said, that man is by nature nasty, brutish, and short, right? So we were never pure breed or pure beings, nothing. Now colonization hit us, we have been violated, we are resisting in our own broken, shaky ways. It will never be perfect. It never was perfect, right? But I really, really understand what you're trying to say. It's a beautiful way of looking at resistance. I would be very happy if you let me peek into your research someday.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you so much, sir, and thank you so much, ma'am. You both did a well discussion, and I found it totally interesting because, and also, as ma'am said, it is really nowadays a relevant topic which can be discussed further. So, thank you. Anyone else who wants to talk?
Ma'am,
It's not necessary. Yes, yes. Please go ahead.
okay. Thank you, ma'am, for your fascinating lecture. I have a question that is that during that time, the post-colonial period, the marginal caste and class people's literature uh, was emerged, as I know. So, is that influenced by the Western colonial language or not? And that is my first question. And if that how it, if that was yes, then why it was influenced? And if the answer is not, then why it was not? It is my question, ma'am.
you. Thank you so much for your question. But let me tell you something, that marginal literature, by marginal, if we are referring to the Dalit section that is writing, Dalit literature had several, mm, how do I put it? Dalit literature cannot be clubbed under one surface, because by literature, if we mean books or short stories or novels, it came a little late, but there were Dalit representations. And of course, then there were Savarna representations of the Dalit. But it cannot be said that colonization directly affected them, because they already existed. I mean, they existed in their own right. Colonization definitely tried to thwart them. Colonization tried to thwart everything that was regional, be it Savarna or be it Dalit. Okay. But at the same time, you know, in contemporary period, Dalit literature has come out in a very poignant manner because it had the need to come out. But colonization definitely disrupted the normalcy of the Dalit literature that would have otherwise come out. I mean, if you look at and also I am just curious, by marginal, did you just refer to caste or you also refer to gender?
Both, ma'am, gender and caste, both.
There were women, like if you read Rosasundari Devi's Atmokatha, or if you read Kalyani Dotto, you will see that there were women who were writing, even Begum Rokeya, there were women who were writing, but of course, the numbers were very few. Even Swarnamoyi Devi, there were women writers. I mean, if the women writers were like 10, Dalit writers were probably 2. That was the ratio. Now, as we went into 20th post-World War era and 21st, more and more people started writing. But definitely, colonization had an effect, had a negative effect in ways, because, for a moment, if we just talk about the Dalit people, we'll see that, they were at the bottom of the society. So they had to bear the economic brunt as well. Like the famine hit them so hard that they were dying. Now, dying people cannot write literature, right? On the other hand, it is also true that had colonization not happened, then women would not have proceeded to come out this better. Because as we all know, traditional scripted Hinduism was happily burning women in the name of sati. So we can understand that, you know, the pros and cons are both very valid. But I really get what you're trying to point out. That's a very interesting question. Thank you. I hope I have satisfied you.
Yes, ma'am. Yes. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Moon, and thank you, ma'am. Anyone else? Is there any query?
Hello, ma'am.
Hi.
Thank you for this wonderful session on post-colonialism. Um, Ma'am, like you said, post-colonial resistance involves reclaiming one's own narrative. And relating it to the discussion you were having earlier before the session started, we were talking about new national education policy. Now, now what is happening in India that we can see because of the new national education policy, we also see a lot of revision of Indian history and rewriting of Indian history. So, is this a genuine form of decolonization, or is it something else under the garb of it? Maybe a very nationalistic revision of what is India's history, and in trying to, yeah, that was my question.
I get your point. I'm sure somebody will come to my rescue when, after answering this, I will stand the chance of losing my job. But I loved your question. Let me tell you something. The NEP today, with all its promises, might be a little challenging for the people who are coming from the underprivileged sections. Because affording 4 long years of graduation is difficult. Number one. Number two is rewriting history and rewriting educational history are not quite the same thing. With the historical tangents that India has had, it is not probably a very wise thing to jeopardize an already existing education system, because this is probably we are probably standing at an era where the third generation of graduates are coming out of individual families, right? So NEP still has a chance of failing students. On the other hand, I would also say that if this works, like several other Western universities, then probably it will work in favor of students who are aspiring researchers. 4 years of graduation, but definitely with a foundation on research. Now, that foundation needs to be promised and fulfilled. And a research master's, the master's that we study here is taught masters. A research master's and a 4 years graduation with a foundation on research might be beneficial for a student aspiring a career in research or higher academia. However, a person who just wants to pursue something else probably will not be quite satiated. But I'm glad we are talking about it.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Jasmine. And once again, thank you, ma'am. Is there any query? You can also talk. It's not necessary that you have some query. You can also talk to ma'am if you want. Okay. Okay, ma'am. So I think if anyone have any query after that, just reach me out. Okay. I will forward your query to ma'am.
Definitely.
So as we conclude today's talk, I have the distinct honor of delivering the vote of thanks. Dr. Sengupta, on behalf of the entire CSRF community and everyone present today here, Please accept our deepest gratitude for sharing your profound knowledge and time with us. Your lecture was not just a talk, it is a master class. I found it truly interesting, and I am indebted to you to throwing light, for throwing light into this. You know, you skillfully illuminated how post-colonial literature functions as a vital side of resistance, reclaiming voice and negotiating complex identities. Your detailed analysis has given us all a much richer framework for understanding the literary and cultural narratives that shape our world. The discussion was intellectually rigorous, exceptionally engaging, and perfectly embodied the transformative power of knowledge that our organization champions. We
Thank you
know
so
how we know how precious your time is, and we are immensely grateful that you carved out space in your schedule to enrich our community this evening. I would also like to thank our director of Valat, Dr. Kalani ma'am, and Anand Haridas sir for continuous support. Finally, thank you for our wonderful, thanks to our wonderfully and attentive audience. Your participation, thoughtful questions, and keen interest are what make these lectures meaningful. Thank you once again, Dr. Sengupta, for this inspiring address. We wish you the very best in your continued research.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
So with this, I am winding up today's session.